All right. So hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining. So I'm Jack. I created a website called Positive Physics, and that's how I met these four amazing teachers who
Mhm.
are going to help us out today. Kind of before I get started with this, I just wanted to show you a
Wow.
little bit about positive physics.
Mhm.
Hold on, yeah, there we go. We got everybody else muted. So yeah, I just wanted to really quickly show you about positive physics in case you haven't used it already. So positive physics, I built it out of my own classroom, and it's really designed to meet students at every level, from basic to AP. If you haven't already created a positive physics account, you can create one, and you can use this Unit 30 and Unit 31 for free. So Unit 30 has all the fundamentals really aligned to AP1 and most aligned to AP2. And then Unit 31 has a ton of practice questions, multiple choice style practice questions for every topic. There are about 160 questions, each with a bunch of versions and explanations. And so I know those can be really valuable for your students. If you use Unit 30, it's really the fundamentals. It's a lot more mathematical than the AP test is. But I think sometimes we forget to make sure that students really have the fundamentals down before we kind of dive into those higher level problems. But enough about me. Yeah, I'm going to start by introducing Chris LaSure. He teaches regular physics as well as AP1 in Connecticut at a Title I school. And yeah, let me turn it over to him, and he'll tell you about kind of what he's doing in these last couple weeks before the AP test.
All right, thank you very much, Jack. So yes, my name is Chris LaSure. I'm a physics teacher at Manchester High School. It's the most diverse high school in Connecticut, 1,700 students and 84 different spoken languages. There are no prerequisites to my course, which means I have kids from all walks with all abilities coming in. So again, I can just first start by saying that positive physics has been a saving grace for both me and my students. It allows me to differentiate and instruct my students in ways that I never could have before. So I've been using positive physics now for, gosh, it seems about 5.5 years. It could be 4.5. I have to get my timetable straight. But I learned about the platform through a small little article in the NSTA. And I reached out to Jack, and he got me hooked up. I've really watched this program grow and develop, and I'm so excited to be here to talk to you about what he's introduced now, the Unit 30 and 31. For AP Physics teachers, we all know how hard it is to get our kids ready in a seemingly impossible time frame. I mean, years ago, there were 3 more units, and they reduced it now, and still, even with the 7 units, it feels like a challenge. So here in the final throes of the course, as we approach the testing date, my focus right now with my students is to brush up on test taking skills, reviewing the content that we've covered this year, and make sure that when they're making mistakes, they're learning from those mistakes. Positive physics does that wonderfully. I think MCQs, if we look at the breakdown and the timetables, kids have about 1.8 minutes per question. So giving kids authentic practice and immediate feedback is difficult. If they're doing it through the AP classroom, they're going through, I'm not going to talk poorly about the College Board's website and how we have to navigate the test bank and whatnot, but I prefer to use a lot of the questions on positive physics first. And I'm really delighted to see the growth my students are making and the pleasure they're having going through these new problem sets. So in these last few weeks, I have to accomplish a lot. In my school, I only get to teach a single block of AP Physics 1. So we don't get a double block with my AP Chem and AP Bio. We've had many snow days and other interruptions, so we're already behind, and that's why I depend on products like this and some others that I'm not going to take the time to talk about, but positive physics is the crux of my instruction. So even today, we've opened up Unit 30 and 31. We're finishing up rotational motion. So the kids have just finished conservation of angular momentum. The way I like to use positive physics, it's always my philosophy, well, technically Paul Hewitt's, is concepts before calculation. So I do build up conceptual development first. We then use positive physics to build confidence so kids can practice using and getting used to the variables, units of measurement, the scaffold instruction, really appreciate the way it's targeted to build those skills first before getting into complete problem sets. We then like to introduce lab materials where the kids can go in and actually either recreate some of the problems they're seeing in positive physics or be inspired by those problems in positive physics, or sometimes even have kids go in and try and verify that certain values.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Cool. Yeah. And so next we're going to go to Veronica. So Veronica teaches AP1 and APC in Wisconsin, and she actually helped write the AP Physics exam and has been a grader for a number of years. And yeah, Veronica, would love to hear like what you're doing with your students in the last couple weeks before the exam.
Well, hello, everybody. So I've been using Positive Physics all year, but since I'm on the committee and helped write the exam and the multiple choice, I'm going to be real specific about the exam. Yes, all my kids, regular P1 and C, use Positive Physics all year. And all the positive things, I agree with Chris, but I want to focus on the exam as someone who's graded exams for 16 years and has been on the committee the last 3 years writing the actual exams. I would say first and foremost, remember that this is going to be scanned. So make sure that, you know, we can't tell the difference between pen and pencil. I would use pen. I tell my kids to bring a pen and a pencil, but probably on the FRQs, I would use pen, maybe pencil for graphing. And make sure you review quickly. Again, doesn't hurt, one more time, what a line of best fit is and how to use that. So always taking 2 points off the line is always a point. What you need to do with it is also another point, but little points like that matter. You know, there's 5 FRQs. The first thing I tell my students to do is to peruse the packet and pick one that you're like super excited to start. Like, I got this, and go with it, and do well. So it's better to do what you choose to do it well. Like doing 3 really well instead of just cruising through all 5 is going to really go far point wise. I would say, you know, for the lab question, you're only going to need a meter stick, a stopwatch, a scale, you know, force sensor, photo gate. Keep it simple. Make sure the kids say what they're going to do with each device. Talk about the variables when in the lab question. What are you going to measure with what? So the first part is writing the procedure, and then there'll be another part where they're asked what to do with that data. And then, so they're not double dinged, there's another section of, oh, hey, these kids came up with these questions, what to do with it. So just usually it's, you know, I tell my kids, the simpler, the better. Like, make sure if you need velocity, is it initial velocity? Is it final velocity? How are you going to get that velocity? Those things. On the paragraph question, make sure you answer the question. I've been reading this for a long time. A lot of kids just restate the question and don't actually answer it. Make sure you're talking about the variables. Make sure you're talking about relationships, at least 3 sentences or bullet points, but it needs to be words. But I tell the kids, you're thinking about connecting 3 main ideas or 3 main topics, like horizontal velocity and horizontal distance. How do you know that they're directly proportional? And then if this goes up, this goes up. So making sure you're talking about relationships between the variables and how you know that is really important. When it says explain, so usually if there's a checkbox question, make sure they check the box and make sure they have some physics related, something related to that question. So as long as they check the box and have something related, it's usually a point. If they draw a relationship between 2 variables, that's always a point. And then correctly doing that's always a point. Briefly explain one key, you know, physics thought, or, you know, it's a 1 pointer. So briefly explain is always 1 pointer. Explain is usually 2. So I tell kids with the lab question and with the paragraph question, you're looking at like 5 things, like 4 or 5 concepts, like, and tying them together. Goodness. Yeah. So, so what I do currently is that, yeah, despite 8 snow days, and so I'm in Wisconsin, I actually live in Minnesota, right over the border. We had quite a few snow days, and we also moved to block this year. So I'm dealing with a lot less time, but I finished last week. So this week, the best thing about block is they're taking the tests. So I have them take a timed multiple choice and a timed FRQ. And then I think the most important thing, one, is that they go through that process, but to grade their own. to go back and grade their own with a rubric so they can learn how they earn the points they earn and how they just missed the other one. And I had a couple kids today, like, do I get the point for this? And, you know, of course I didn't show work for something little. And I'm like, yeah, what have I been saying all year? I'm like, oh, okay. But yeah, yes, just seeing those little things, or what earns it, what doesn't. Yeah, I think that's really important. And then we'll do the whole process again. So I like them to take at least 2 and then grade their own. I do put their best super score in the grade book, so a little motivation to do well, but obviously not out of, what is it, 90 points or whatever it is, a lot less than that. But yeah, and then just a lot of questions. And then I do have a buffet of, like Chris said earlier, of things to do. So I have the multiple choice, each multiple choice, I have the unit it's from. And so when they grade their multiple choice themselves, they're taking note of what units it's from. And then I have a list of like how many were at each and what percentage. So they know I'm deficient in circular motion and gravity, because that's usually what they're deficient in. You know, and I have all the videos posted from AP Classroom. I've got, you know, unit 30 and 31 posted. They're used to using positive physics for more practice on the multiple choice. And then the workbooks again, but basically I just highly recommend the review videos from 23, 22, and 21. And then some flipping physics, like I have posted. I like his exams you need to know, or equations you need to know that are on the equation sheet, and then just brief reviews. I think he does a good job of like going through brief reviews, like, hey kids, if you're deficient in this, or like you really like, oh shoot, I wish I remembered that. Watching a 10-minute video, if you just one more piece of content sticks in your brain, it's going to go far. And I can't agree with Chris more. Concepts. And that's what I've been preaching to my kids. Concepts are going to take you far on the multiple choice. Concepts are going to take you far on the FRQ. Okay. And I probably talked too much. Okay.
Thank you, Veronica. By the way, if anyone has questions, since we have a relatively large group, feel free to put them in the chat. Also leave plenty of time for you guys to ask questions at the end. And yeah, so next I was going to go to Barb Austin, and Barb teaches AP1 at a Title I school in Ohio. And Barb, yeah, I'd love to hear what you are doing in the last couple of weeks before the exam.
Sure. I actually teach regular physics, AP1 and AP2.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No worries. This year is an interesting year because our district scheduled senior exams on May 12th. And so I know it's kind of crazy that we're going up, they're overlapping, but the juniors are still going to be here until the end of May. So what I'm doing the last couple of weeks in order to make review kind of fun, but also really drive home this idea of concepts that Chris and Veronica talked about, was I'm having my students do some projects that are cover multiple units, and then couple that with questions from positive physics and also AP Classroom. So when I first started teaching 7 years ago, I've actually been teaching for a long time, but I stopped in the middle to be a college professor for a long time, and then went back to teaching high school 7 years ago before I taught Physics B and now AP Physics 1 and 2. I started using a project-based curriculum that was developed by George Lucas, which is great, phenomenal projects, but I felt like it wasn't really preparing my students well for the AP test. And so I like some years I do more of the projects and some years I do fewer, but this year I decided to put like my favorite projects at the end. And so they just finished up one that covered kinematics and energy, where they created bows out of PVC, and then launched them. They could choose the equipment that they wanted to analyze the force generated in the bow, elastic energy in the bow, translating to kinetic energy, and then it became a projectile. So we covered quite a bit of ground as well as quite a bit of equipment. They could do video analysis, generate graphs, they could do a motion detector, or figure out how to do photo gates. And so everybody kind of did something different. And so their analysis was pretty extensive in terms of putting concepts together like you would with different types of the FRQs. And then during that time where they were working on that in class, I also had them doing positive physics. So they were getting the equations reinforced, had to do numerical calculation reinforced. And so, so that's what I've been doing, is incorporating some of these projects. They're also going to be, we just started today, one where they do crash scene analysis. And so we're looking at impulse and momentum. And so that's what I'm doing. It's kind of low key. I'm so much less concerned about their actual results than that they are really remembering how the concepts go together and being able to pull things from multiple units, because there are, you know, questions. I think that, you know, a lot of AP, like even the quote unquote simple multiple choice, you know, it really expects you to like recognize concepts. And so that's what they are having to do in these projects. And so that's what I'm doing. Next week, we are going to, so like I said, I'm coupling it, project written work, multiple choice from positive physics. And then also I'm doing the topic questions that we have missed. I'm like, it's taking me so much time to go back and put the topic questions that we missed into these little 5-question quizzes. And so that's how we're starting class each day. That's what I'm doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Barb. And yeah, real quick, there was a question in the chat that I want to get to really quick before we get to you, Abby. Matt and Kara asked about, for the lab-based free response questions, what do you guys think about putting a motion sensor as a piece of equipment, or even like cell phone and video analysis software? Maybe Veronica, do you want to take that? And then Chris, I saw your comment, but if you'd repeat that for everyone.
A motion sensor is fine as long as you say how you're going to use it. I mean, we're pretty accepting of most things that you could probably use in your physics lab. Usually the issue is kids have to say how they're going to use it. Are they going to use it to get total distance, instantaneous velocity? What are they going to use with that? So as long as they describe it, if it's something they've used in your classroom, which is great about Barb, is that they're doing that. So that's going to be like, oh, we did that, you know, that's going to be great. Yeah, those things are fine. Yeah. If it's anything any physics teacher has heard of, we will give them credit. And that's the other thing. Kids are awarded points. We want to award kids points for good physics. It might not seem like it, but that's our main goal, is that we really want to. Sometimes a kid will write stuff that's got some good physics in it, but they didn't answer the question or didn't, you know, so that's why I like them to take the test. And, you know, again, I mirror that all year. So once we hit 2 topics, I'm always bringing everything back into labs and assessments that we do, like Barb's doing with her projects.
And I think, Chris, you had a similar but slightly different take, if you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah, no, and it really parrots into what Veronica was saying earlier when she opened up about teaching. When I do experimental design, I like to, you know, always err on the side of caution and follow the KISS format, keep it simple. It is meter stick, stopwatch, spring scale, sometimes balance if necessary. Very rarely will you need anything else. In fact, I don't think you do need anything else. Position and time are fundamental, and everything else comes from that. So if a student is presented with a very challenging, you know, experimental design question and they don't know where to begin, if they're going to start throwing things at it that they've never done in class, like I see video analysis, have your students really done video analysis in the classroom? I mean, it's great to use Pivot Interactives, but the act of doing your own video analysis, remembering details, someone that's done video analysis over and over again knows I have to remember to put my meter stick in my frame of reference so I can tell the computer what is actually happening. If a student doesn't include that in their procedure, that might get them dinged. if they're trying to use a photo gate to get certain kinds of speeds, if they're not orienting it in the right spot, or if they're using it improperly, they may think they're getting data, but that data is going to be invalid. And what I teach my students, and they think I'm pretty cheeky for, I'm like, AP Physics 1 test is pretty easy. All I have to do is be right without being wrong. And they always look at me, but I'm like, let's look at these rubrics together. You can be right all along the way and do great physics. And as soon as you use a term incorrectly or use a tool incorrectly, you're going to get dinged for that. You get to that last line in the rubric, and it's like a clear and cohesive paragraph that uses the terms without using them incorrectly. Kids sometimes have a tendency to write too much. And as soon as they start writing too much, that's when the little devil in the details, they're going to have something wrong. But everyone has access, we're hoping, right, to meter sticks and stopwatches. And you're probably using those tools when you introduce kinematics, and you continue to use them throughout the year. So I want my students to use and write about the things they're most familiar with. And they can do some pretty great physics with just those tools. Now, if you have kids using motion sensors all the time, that's great. For me in my classroom, there's so many little obstacles that I don't get good, like, the way the motion sensors work. I always have interference, so I never get good clean data. We've never had awesome results from that. So I like to make sure that we get good results that are repeatable, that we can analyze. So, it really does go with what your kids are doing, what they're comfortable with. If they're confident that it's going to work, if they're not, then just go back to the basics, and be right without being wrong.
Gotcha. Thank you. And yeah, lastly, let's go to Abby. Abby taught AP1 in California.
Hi, everyone. So a lot of things have been covered already, so I'll be very concise. So I know various people have mentioned doing a practice AP test, which I think is really helpful if you have time to do that. But like Veronica said, I think that it's only really helpful if you have the time to actually go over it and make sure the kids get feedback on it, whether that's themselves or from you or from their peers. And I've previously struggled to do the full test and then get them feedback on the whole test multiple times, in the short time available. So something I found useful in the past is to do mini quizzes of questions. Sometimes I start with doing it arranged by unit, and then I have them timed. So Chris mentioned earlier, it's 1.8 minutes per question on the multiple choice. So I'll set a timer for 18 minutes, give them 10 questions. And then afterwards, if I'm using the positive physics multiple choice questions, they obviously get their immediate feedback. And then I would probably have them work together in teams to talk through each question, make their corrections, and write an explanation for if they got it wrong, why was it wrong, and why is the correct answer right? And then I know Veronica mentioned keeping tally of which units they're doing well on and which ones they're struggling with. That's something that's also really helpful about doing the ones on positive physics, because they're in unit 31, they're grouped by unit. So a kid can easily see, oh, I got 10 out of 10 on the velocity one. I don't need to study that anymore. Or I got 2 out of 10 on this one. I need to study that more. So I find that a really useful diagnostic tool for students to figure out what they need to focus on in their further study, whilst also giving them that timed practice, which helps practice, the different exam techniques of time management in a test. So that's the main thing I would be doing in the last few weeks of school. But yeah, as Veronica mentioned, and I mentioned already, I think pairing the timed practice with the feedback and making sure they're reflecting on that and figuring out where they need to improve. I think all those parts are necessary for the actual AP practice to really be beneficial. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. And cool. Yeah. So now that we've gone through our 4 panelists, I'd love to just kind of open it up. And yeah, feel free to if you have questions. Oh yeah, Chris, one more thing. Yeah, you.
Well, honestly, I was done talking until I heard this wonderful thing that Abby was saying. It made me think. Using the College Board's materials is fantastic, and I agree with everything she's saying, and as it relates to what Veronica was saying. But this is a time that I'm not sure how other teachers use the personal progress checks, but the College Board does have rules around using those as grades. And while I do use them at times, throughout the year to see so kids can track their own progress, I think this is a great time, and how I do it up to the test is I will reassign those progress checks. You can now reset them to the College Board, and I have them take them at home. It's optional. They can do it. Most will. And when they take those progress checks based on how they do, that's when I'll send them back into positive physics. Because if they're doing well on units 1 and maybe they struggle in dynamics 2, and of course they're all struggling on circular motion 3, it doesn't matter. They're going through and they're getting their own feedback, like where they need to practice, but they can't go and get additional questions. That depends on the teacher to assign those, and that takes time, and none of us have it. So instead, sending them back into positive physics to go into those previous units, that's when they're going into the extra practice. That's when they're getting more problems to really refine those skills, to revisit, practice, reinforce those concepts. And the idea of writing down, why did I get this wrong? That is so important to reflect on those mistakes, because positive physics is giving that immediate feedback. It allows them that, I think there's a very small window to maximize learning from failure. If you're waiting too long, you're not going to remember what it is that you did. So using the College Board's materials in conjunction with positive physics and the ability to get problems refreshed, because the extra practice mode, the teacher has the control to say, hey, there's 30 or 20 questions in this pool. I'm gonna put 5 in the extra practice. And when they hit reset, it's a new random set. So they're seeing new questions each time. They may be familiar, but honestly, how many of our kids are going to remember the same question they did from back in October? It will feel new to them again. And it's a great way to review and use the College Board's material in conjunction with the positive physics that the kids have been using all year. So I definitely agree with that, Abby.
Gotcha. Thanks, Chris. Cool. I know we're over time already. I'm happy to stay on as long as people have questions. Veronica, Barb, Chris, and Abby, thank you so much for your thoughts and all of that. If you guys got to go, definitely understand. But I'm going to stick around. I did see. So and yeah, if anyone has to hop off, feel free. Won't be offended. But and thank you again for coming. I did see still some questions in the chat. So I want to. I'll stay around as long as people need, but yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. And yeah, speaking of which, Melissa, who's another AP reader, do you mind just like unmuting yourself and explaining what you wrote in the chat? I think that was super helpful. Or I can read it if, sorry for putting you on the spot. All right, maybe Melissa is
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to use Zoom on my phone because I actually chaperoned a lacrosse game, so I'm on my way home. Just got in the driveway. So yeah, 4 years as an AP reader. This is my 9th year teaching a mix of 1 and C. And really just make sure they're not making up sensors on the lab question. Because that tends to happen a lot. Like they'll say like, use a force sensor or use a momentum sensor, but then they don't like say what data they would get from it. So I just always recommend to my kids, measure name of the variable with name of the tool. So like less is more. So like measure angle with protractor if it's needed. So like less is just more, and watch out for making up sensors because they'll overcomplicate things. And it's cool to use slow-mo. I use slow-mo video when we do position and time graphs because I feel like they need to know how to use a motion detector, but also the analog method as well. And I would just say the more that they practice writing and simplifying it to the least number of steps, the better. So that's all my comment was.
Perfect. Thank you. No, that's super helpful.
And,
Yeah.
and those are some MCQ, multiple choices, like what's the least, that could be a MCQ question that they'll see, like they're going to do this experiment. What's the least number of tools they need? And they'll give like, some options as well. Can I say something real quick? I feel like this year more than any other year, we're really leading kids in the right direction. So if you can tell your kids, hey, if you feel like the exam's leading you in a certain direction, we are. So if we're leading you down conservation momentum, conservation of energy, rotational motion, we are. I feel like more so than any other exam, we, if there's a question, a follow-up question and they didn't address it in the part before, it's like, oh, they're asking about conservation of energy. And I didn't think about that before. I feel like it's really leading, and to have kids just be aware if they feel like you know, they're asking me these questions. I should be really thinking about this concept that we did that on purpose. So we really want kids to do well. And yeah. One other thing is that with so again, I use the rubric for the FRQs, but for the multiple choice, when I have kids go over them, I've worked out all the problems. I make copies that don't leave my room, but I have all the multiple choice worked out so they can see like what the process was to do that. And then I also have them reflect as well, as people were saying. But I wanted to say, like, I don't just have them check the multiple choice. I have them go over the actual answers as well.
Veronica, as one of the people who writes these test questions, I've never actually seen the true test. I've seen the practice exams. Do you know when the MCQ comes out and they open it up and they take their 50 questions, are those questions organized by topic or are they all mixed together?
They're all mixed.
They are all mixed. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think back in the day, AP Physics B, when I think it used to follow a topic order. And maybe the first iteration of the 2016 version of the Physics 1 test. But yeah, I was telling my old boss who used to teach us, like, I don't think they follow an order anymore. The kids have to be able to kind of read and understand the concept and how it applies.
To be fair, they're still chunked, just like the practice exam. There'll be like a leading prompt and there might be 3 questions or 4 questions after it. So I feel like they're kind of still grouped, but you could have a bunch of unit 1 and then a bunch of unit 5 and then 6 and then, you know, it's mixed in there. So it's not like, oh, I should be thinking about circular motion because I'm, you know, I'm to that part of the test. But the last 5 questions are multi, you know, pick 2. Make sure they know I believe the Scantron's like a little bit different section. Those are going away because they are not doing what they were intended to do. So it was supposed to be the 2024 exam, but it's going to be starting the 2025 exam. Those are going away because those statistically don't do well because you have to get both of them right. And yeah. So I'm kind of glad they're going away. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, right, is the actual Scantron itself is an A through E, but options are only A through D. So we don't want our kids, like, don't go and don't say, oh, it's the last option. Let me bubble in the last bubble. Make sure they're bubbling in the letter as well. Now, one question I didn't see come up. I have to know, what are teachers doing to get their kids ready for derivations? This is the #1 thing my students always feel every year. They've never had enough practice. And I say we use positive physics every time there's a good problem. Usually at the end, like say, I think, Jack, at the end of the challenge problems, there's always one that there's a data table and they feel like they're making busy work. I'm just doing the same problem over and over again. Like, that's the time that you make your derivation from that thing, and then your derivation is going to be able to fill in that table almost just perfectly for you. You have the solution there. But I find it very difficult to give my kids authentic opportunities to practice like novel derivations. I find the College Board gives us some, and there is the wonderful resource that didn't come up, the AP workbook. And hopefully if you're still in the room right now, you've been using that all year. And if you don't know where to access that, please reach out. It is through the College Board online resources. Go to the course overview, get that workbook out. If you haven't used it all year, now's the time to use that very last part, which is their topic review. It's a workbook chapter that covers all the units, and they do have some derivation stuff there. But I wondered how other teachers were preparing for that. What do you do, Veronica, for derivations?
Well, one, if it says derive, you have to show your steps. So that's the key, is that you have to show your steps. And I just explain to kids, you're taking just like you would with a simple horizontal projectile. You're going to solve for time in the air with height, your starting height, and you're going to solve for X or whatever you're supposed to solve for with VOX and T. Like, you're using 2 different equations to get something. You know, you're combining 2 equations that you use all the time. And, you know, sometimes that's variables only, and sometimes you're doing it, in steps. So, you know, I do purposely write questions like that. I have them practice that all the way through. But a lot of times kids are not correctly showing where they start and where they end up. Like, if you're starting with conservation of energy, like, it's usually a point of it started with all gravitational, and now it has kinetic and maybe spring energy, like starting with those, and then variables, and then substituting in numbers or whatever it may be, or then your other equation that you have and combining them. And the solution, just like, what was it, 2021? No, I don't know, the one where, because I was in charge of this question, the one where they had to jump over the cars.
The question that most kids spend the
Yes.
entire time
Yes.
doing and didn't do the other four
The
questions.
the real answer was really ugly, and my first reaction would be like, oh, that can't be right. You know, it was like 4h cosine theta sine
so
theta over 2g or something. And
It
I
was the
said,
range equation, but not fully
Right,
using the trig identity. So they had
right.
the y-axis as like 4 cosine theta or something. It was crazy. Yeah.
Right. So I tell kids it might be ugly and it might be right. But
Yeah.
as long as they're showing their steps, so like that problem, a lot of kids didn't get that last answer. But if they showed the conservation of energy and then they showed the kinematics equation, or like you knew VOY, VOX and what those were and how they combine them together. I didn't write that. I didn't write that question.
There's a lot of complaints about that one, but I love it. I use it every year now still I mean, it's a great one to show.
That
like,
that one's pretty tough because I mean I don't think we have anything where, because you had to take like 3 different things and bring them together. I don't think we
Yeah,
do that. That was
they have the
quite a
dips that
bit.
goes lower and comes back up, so you could ignore
Yes.
the bottom potential. Then you had
Yes.
the launch velocity, and then you had to know the angle where it landed. There was so much that went into it. And the derivation for last year's second question with the moons and the planet.
Oh
it turned
yes.
out that wasn't. It was just Newton's universal law of gravity, and there was only a couple little substitutions. But the derivation wasn't. I think our students get used to seeing elegance sometimes, like
Yes.
watching everything melt away. And that one was still just a pretty beefy equation. And the kids thought they had got it wrong. They were actually discouraged leaving it. And when I got it, turns out most of those kids got it right. So it doesn't always have to be beautiful and elegant. Just follow
Yes.
the rules. I teach my students, like, you have to start with an equation from the equation sheet. That's the law. That's what the truth is.
Mhm.
And algebra is truth too. So if you take 2 truths and then you use algebra to combine those things through substitution elimination, you just keep going. We call our sacrificial variables. Like, what aren't you allowed to have in your equation? So paying attention to the language. And one thing I think maybe new AP teachers don't realize is they have to use the letters the College Board says. If it's a distance, and we usually use X for that, but they're calling it D or capital L, and it says describe it in terms of L. I think that's the College Board's way of making sure kids aren't trying to game the test and memorize equations. They need to know what L truly represents in the units of measurements. Oh, L is a distance. I know that I have this equation that represents how to get that with a certain period of time or amount of force, etc. There's so much to cover and so much to do. If you are a first-year teacher, do not get discouraged. This is a learning process, and every year you'll get better at it, and your students will appreciate it even more. It is truly rewarding.
Thank you again for everybody for coming out. Any last questions before we call this a day?
I just dropped the name of the derivation practice I use. I think it was Michael Friedman and Mark Reef who put it together and posted it in one of the AP, I think national AP teachers. I don't think it was just the reader group. I think it was like the national one, but basically it's 10 mechanics topics with follow-up questions, and it's awesome. So I would recommend that to anybody who's looking for something.
Perfect. Thank you. Cool. Well, thank you guys all for coming out. I really appreciate it. It was also really fun for me to see so many names of people that I recognize that I've exchanged emails with over the years now. Yeah, also, if you haven't used Positive Physics and you want to, again, these units 30 and 31 are completely free. If you have any problem signing up or anything, my email address is on the homepage, and I think people will tell you I tend to be pretty responsive. So yeah, thank you again for coming. Really appreciate it. And best of luck to everyone on their AP tests. All right. Thanks again.